Have you ever seen something on TV and wondered, wow, I wonder how different the world would be if that had never happened? Or maybe you've thought of all the different ways the present world could develop, some more pessimistic than others. Well, Earth 2057, which I shorten to Earth 57 or E57, is a future Earth thought experiment. Kind of. What this video series aims to do is take you through the lore of this extensive timeline. A lot of the stories I write or plan on writing that take place on Earth happen in this timeline. Everything from sci-fi space empires in the 68th century to the problems confronting teens in the late 2010s as they struggle to cope with toxic school environments. It's all on the same millennia-long timeline. So, what I plan on doing today is taking you through the 2020s and 2030s in this timeline. I'll tell you now that it is intentionally semi absurdist, so not all of it is supposed to make total sense. A lot of the political themes are supposed to be somewhat satirical, but most of the person to person interactions are more grounded in reality, if that makes sense. I hope so, because I am fully aware that if the United States were to be dissolved by its president today, that president would not more or less abandon half the country. Then again, we have seen some pretty crazy things lately. One more thing before I get into this, there will be a lot of focus on the political side of events. This is a broad overview of the periods I wish to cover, so I won't be focusing on how one teen is dealing with one pandemic or another. That's what I'm writing books for. I'm going to try my best not to let any of my own personal political bias leak into this discussion, and in return for that, I'm going to ask you to not flood the comment section with uncivil political banter. We've had enough of that lately, don't you think? I think the best place to start would be the point of divergence. It's a date you might recognize, January 6th, 2021. There are other things that happened before 2021, but they're only important a few millennia down the line, and I don't want to spoil that before you read the book I'm going to write about it. So, for now, let's just pretend January 6th, 2021 is the first date where something goes differently. There is a protest at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. A joint session of Congress starts certifying the votes, some objections are made, and the whole process is over just in time for dinner. No riot, no insurrection, no storming of the Capitol building. There is nothing that happens to discredit Trump and his election fraud claims. Joe Biden is inaugurated as the 46th president on January 20th, 2021, and goes about streamlining the vaccination efforts. By the end of 2021, most of the US is preparing to go back to normal, as the majority of the populace has been vaccinated. A lot of the rest of the world is doing the same thing, and you know what that means? A return to the normal political back and forth we had before we all got roned. The pandemic probably still continues into 2022 and 23, but the developed world has moved on. As people become more and more critical of the government for keeping some of the more restrictive pandemic era provisions in place, President Biden's health begins to decline. At age 80 in mid 2023, I won't give a specific date because I don't want it to accidentally be somewhat accurate, he dies and is succeeded by Kamala Harris, who becomes the 47th President of the United States. The now President Harris starts appealing to the further left side of the American political spectrum, angering and alienating the right and giving Trump's new Patriot Party a more solid base as he ramps up his rallies in both frequency and size. The 2024 election comes around, and Trump manages to defeat the incumbent Kamala Harris, possibly with some slight election fraud. Trump is inaugurated on January 20th, 2025, as the 48th president, with his vice president being none other than Rudy Giuliani. The second inauguration of Donald Trump triggers riots across the cities of the US, most notably in Washington, D.C., Seattle, Portland, Chicago, and St. Louis. These protests die down, only to spring back up every time Trump does something that the American populace doesn't like. By the 2026 midterms, it's obvious how obsolete the old Republican Party is. Elected officials like Adam Kinzinger and Lisa Murkowski have lost their seats, and Mitt Romney is only hanging on to his by a few thousand votes. The Senate is totally transformed. On the heels of Trump's 2024 presidential victory, the Patriot Party manages to gain control of the Senate. The 28th Amendment is soon passed, giving the president the option of running for a third term. However, Trump dies of old age in early 2028, passing the presidency to Rudy Giuliani. For those of you keeping track, President Giuliani is the 49th POTUS. Due to some actions during Trump's second term that I will keep ambiguous, the US has sanctions placed on it in late 2025. These sanctions hit the country hard, and, coupled with Giuliani's incompetence, as well as some economic things that I am not near enough qualified to try to understand, the market finally crashes on November 1st, 2026. This state specifically because a massive winter storm hits the US, covering even parts of California and Florida in several inches of snow. As banks close and the government refuses to do much about it, vast amounts of people fall into poverty. What came to be known as Dawn's Depression had begun and would not ease up for years. At the end of 2029, a New York Times journalist named Paul Eigen writes an article in which he coins the term, well, you'll find it in that quote, as both a reference to the Roaring Twenties and the somewhat widespread practice during Dawn's Depression of legalizing prostitution at the city level, just so people could make some money. We're not even out of the 20s yet, and this is already a pretty bleak timeline. I bet you're wondering if Rudy wins the 2028 election. He actually chooses not to run because of failing health. Instead, the Patriot candidate Nikki Haley runs against the Democratic challenger Alexandria Ocasio Cortez. The Patriots make some extravagant promises, which, coupled with good old American party politics, just barely wins them the election. Nikki Haley is sworn in as the 50th President of the United States in January 2029. President Haley actually does a decent job during her first term, managing to relieve America of the Depression a bit and finding its way out of the sanctions held over from the second Trump era. She wins re election in 2032 because of this, but during her second term, her administration becomes embroiled in several scandals that, like Ulysses S. Grant before her, ruin her chances of running for a third term. But that doesn't stop her from trying, and in 2036, she runs against Gabriela Celaranta, a fresh new face in the Democratic Party who promises a return to some kind of normal. Celaranta wins with these promises and a collective American fatigue of the Patriot Party. On January 20th, 2037, Gabriela Celaranta is inaugurated as the 51st President of the United States. This is where we'll stop for today's episode. So, let's see. We've covered the period from 2021 to 2036, basically. Next time, I'd like to cover 2037 to 2055, just before the extraordinarily consequential election of 2056. But for now, that's about it. If this was just a bore of politics to you, well, I promise things will get interesting in the next few episodes. Trust me, you will want to see what happens in the 2050s. For now, though, that's about all from me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know in the comments what you thought and subscribe so you don't miss the next installment of Earth-57 lore. See you all in the next one.